This week we head back down the UFO UAP rabbit hole and we talk with Grant Lavac. He's doing some valuable research and also petitioning the government down under to release what they know about UAPs and UFOs, as the US is doing right now. I know I've said it a number of times, however, the craziest thing, well, one of the craziest things that's happened over the last few years is that they confirmed that UFOs and UAPs are real and nobody cares. The ramifications of that are hard to wrap your head around, but I suppose cognitive dissonance is going around. I love sitting down with Grant. He's very knowledgeable, and we had a really good, wide-ranging discussion, not only about some of the encounters that have happened down under and the recorded cases, however, just a wide-ranging discussion about the genre in general, because it's so fascinating. I was going to release this one yesterday because there's a new DoD document coming out at time of release. However, it hasn't got out yet, so I've got a couple of swapcasts with encounters down under coming up, so I might tack some of that stuff onto that, or we might review it before the next DFS. Not too sure what music's going to be this time. I'll have a bit of a look, see if I can make it a bit weird. However, please look after yourselves. Be kind. Oh, and I can't say stay safe anymore. One of the awesome listeners said they don't like that. Apparently it's something to do with the WEF. That's one of their mottos, stay safe. So we don't need that. Just look after yourselves and be kind and be cool. Remember, we're on Patreon. Unlocking the code. If you want to swing a couple of bucks our way, that'd be awesome. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a review. That does help. 5 stars, etc. Blah, blah. That's it. Enjoy this one. UAPs and UFOs with Grant Lavac. Thanks, everyone. Talk soon. Cheers.
There's a poison in the structure. People suffocate. We're suffocated daily, making our own bubble. Subtle is the cuddle of the snake that squeezes. Hate to see this matrix seizes. Maybe we just need to pull the plug. Drain the system, poison out of body. You've been probably overdosing most of your life and never noticed. Overloaded, rub the cups and come and dosing. No one's open, no emotion, no engulfed in this dimension here. We work all day and it's always a thinking crystal clear. Everything we do revolves around the dollar count. It's all around us, all around. We're falling down and knocks you out. Get off the couch. It's all think out the type of flame will cost you cancer, jobs and houses all around. Got your spouses, got your houses, call the council, got no answers. Evolving out in small amounts. It's all we have. It's all planned out for our defeat. Water down the modern man and bottle up. So we have no intuition of a vision that it's all corrupt. I know we read our vision, if we always been forgotten. We're sick of our thoughts and living in boxes. Now let's go find all of those outreaches, forgotten the beaches to walk on the treetops tomorrow. All pieces of part of us. Go find out what's been making you take, but didn't face it with criticism. Awaken your inner visions. Slow right down. You better leave your belongings. You'll start receiving your callings and be unleashing from bondages. Draining it out, every day is about a way to get out. Find a solution, live illusion, portrayed every day in our face. We do what they say, they use us away. Pollution can take, inducing our brains. We choose to escape, to do what they make. You wear it on your face, I can see the burden on your shoulders heavy. And it's getting unrelenting, you're fouling from how hard the world strains you. When stress is depresses, confess. It's just a system that's a hope that puts you in scenarios you never chose. It's not your fault that every known element in your life has been controlled. Everything but not your soul. So this can be some therapy, some psychedelic clarity. Don't fight between polarities, go where it will not go. Slide between the barricades, it's nice to be aware. Things just kinda like some kerosene, lighten up the world. It's a poisonous system, you didn't invent this prison. So who'd you be when it's all out? Everything you think needs to go now. Defeat the people that hold down you from beating you, blow out your brain cloud. Become new and escape now, take Route 86, escape now. Gotta lay down everything you learned, everything you know, everything they ever told you. Been the poison from your soul. Bringing it out, draining it out. Every day is about a way to get out. Our minds are polluted, find a solution. Life illusion, portrayed every day in our face. We do what they say, the uses away. Pollution can take, inducing our brains. We choose to escape, do what they make, do what they make. People beyond. People beyond. Waking up to the people we need to be. 2004. Beat by Cumulus.
Well, it's a shocking eruption of great electrical energy. I feel connected to all living things, to flowers, to some special spirit, and even to some great unseen living force.
Welcome back, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce Grant Lavac to the podcast. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Very well. Thanks for having me on and a chance to chat with your listeners.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Thank you. So speaking to the listeners, why don't you tell them about yourself, mate? You're doing some interesting research. You've got a healthy obsession with Kurt Russell. Like, where do you want to go?
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose like a lot of people, when COVID hit, we found ourselves spending a lot more time at home and not being able to engage and socialize. I kind of threw myself into the UFO or UAP topic, as it's now referred to, and I'd always had an interest in it since I was a kid. But I really threw myself in and became a sponge and tried to learn as much as I possibly could and watch as many subject matter experts and thought leaders in the space. And I mean, my first foray, I guess, into the UFO topic started when I was a young fella. My dad, I was born and raised in Sydney, and I was around about 7 or 8 years of age. I suspect my dad may have had a bit of an interest in it as well, but he took me to a UFO photo exhibition that was at the Centrepoint Tower, or I think they now call it Sydney Tower. And it was an incredible exhibition because they had a lot of black and white photos that they'd blown up on big canvas and stuff and put on display around the exhibition. And one of the photos was of the McMinnville photo, that black and white McMinnville photo from the 50s. And I've said this a number of times on other podcasts, but I just literally lost myself in that photo and just stared at it for what could have been a good 10, 15 minutes, just imagining what it would have been like to be that, that farmer on his property looking up, or that rancher, and just seeing something very frightening, but also very fascinating in front of him. So that kind of spurred my interest from a very young age. And then growing up as a teen in the 90s, the X-Files, every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock,
absolutely.
And
footy training used to be on Thursday night. You have to watch the X-Files on Wednesday night, because when you went to footy training on Thursday night, you had to talk about X-Files.
And God forbid you forget, you miss an episode, because then you'd feel totally out of it the next day when you're chatting with your mates at school. But and I have some subscriptions going up for 10 times and stuff. But it really wasn't until the bombshell articles, I guess, of December of 2017 came out in the New York Times, where Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal made news and revealed to the world that the US did have a UFO program under the moniker of ATIP, but there's a lot of
Blue Book. The list goes on.
Blue Book, ORSTAP, ATIP, UAPF, the UAP Task Force, and now the All Domain Anomalies Resolutions Office, ARROW. So ever since really 2017, and then in part because of COVID, I've just really become entrenched in the topic and tried to learn as much as I possibly could. And I watched a lot of live streams and listened to a lot of podcasts. Jimmy Church was probably one of the first I listened to on Fade to Black, and became aware of John Greenwald Jr. at the blackvault.com and some other guys. And then, I was wondering, well, I wonder what Australia's doing about this topic, seeing as our US ally and Five Eyes partner is taking it so seriously, and essentially admitted to the world, courtesy of the June 2021 ODNI preliminary assessment on UAP, that UFOs are real. 143 out of 144 cases they weren't able to identify. And so I use that as kind of inspiration to engage my elected representatives here in Australia and ask the question, our US ally is taking this topic very seriously. What is Australia doing? And that's kind of been my burning mission ever since, to understand why Australia's got its head buried in the sand and not taking the topic seriously. So,
well, look, I think there's 1,000 things to talk about there. And look, number one, Australia buries its head in the sand in a lot of ways, the way that our governmental framework works. And I think it is interesting, right? I mean, what is Australia doing? I mean, that's sort of where I ended up with my research as far as megalithic stuff is concerned. It's like there's a big Australia-sized hole in the megalithic research. And I imagine, like yourself, there's nothing to find here in Australia, is there? I mean, you talk about the Macmillan incident, you've got the stuff at the, trying to remember the school back in the 50s as well. Westall, yeah. Our joint contact, Anthony Goodall from Cairns Down Under, he did another amazing episode about another incident that happened, and many, many that have happened. This phenomenon is not, it's not like it's an America thing. It's not like, because I mean, part of that other group of research that came out in 2021, we sort of found out the French are very open to it as well, and they're recording a lot of stuff as well. Spain is recording stuff. It's not, this is happening.
It's not isolated. No, yeah, it's not isolated to North America. We just, I think America is just making a lot more noise about it than anyone else.
Well, they are the given superpower of the moment, aren't they? So, we glean a lot of our information and media through that channel. When we talk about, I mean, it's crazy. Like we said before we hit the record button, let's just break it down real simple. So UAPs and UFOs are real, okay? I know we want to talk about Ryan Graves and stuff, and the plethora of evidence that exists for that now. No denying it. So then, by extension, either ultra-terrestrials, which is a race that has existed on this planet potentially prior to the last big cataclysm, and who knows for how long, or extraterrestrials, therefore people from somewhere else, whether it be interdimensionally or space or whichever way you want to go with it. Either way, one of those things is true. And it just doesn't seem to have entered the zeitgeist. I don't know what, I mean, there's obviously a lot of fear and control, divide and conquer. The psychological operation we were all under the last few years was pretty crazy. However, it surprises me that more people don't care. I mean, what's your thoughts about that? I mean,
yeah, it's good. It's a good question. I mean, I think for a long time, the extraterrestrial hypothesis has always been the most fascinating and I guess exciting one for folks. That whenever you see mainstream media or news media cover the UFO topic, and this is what excuse my French, but this is what shits me about the news media is that, and they still do it to this day, that they'll throw on the X-Files theme at the front end of every segment they do. So there's still that level of taking the piss and ridicule and not taking it seriously. But I mean, and I've listened to many, I mean, Ross Coulthard being one, Frank Milburn, and many others, Michael Masters. It's not improbable that the phenomenon is actually more than one thing. I mean, it could be absolutely extraterrestrial. It could very well be ultra-terrestrial, some breakaway civilization that's managed to evade human detection for millennia, and mainly because we maybe don't have the technology to detect it. It could also be there's the future human hypothesis. Is this us from the future that has managed to have some form of engagement with our present? So it's fascinating to ask the question. What are UAP? Who's operating these anomalous objects? And I certainly think it's worth asking the question, well, what else could it be other than extraterrestrial? And I'm glad that there are people like Michael Masters and Gary Nolan, and there's Avi Loeb. I really admire the work that Avi Loeb is doing.
He went out on a limb. To talk about Oumuamua.
Absolutely, he really and one of the things I like about Avi Loeb is, he's not driven by ego. He lets the data speak for itself.
The data gave him a conclusion that shocked him as much as anyone. If you go back to the early times when he was releasing that data initially, and everyone's like, oh, it was a space rock. Well, no, it actually had direction. It changed thrust. It changed direction through our solar system. It was something else.
Yep.
And you know.
And he asked the question, and he put an idea for it. And there are a lot of people in the academic community that probably ridiculed him, but he didn't really care. He just follows the facts wherever they lead, and that's what I really admire in what he's doing with the Galileo project, in that he's not waiting for government to reveal any information, which they're very, very unlikely to do, and he's not relying on classified information because he can't do anything with it. He can't open source it. So he's just he's taken it upon himself, and he's procured an amazing cross section of talent and skill sets and expertise to embark on an endeavor to capture high fidelity, high resolution imagery of UAP.
Well, some of the photos we've been getting out of the declassified information are very interesting as well. Some of the pictures, and there's the gimbal and the go fast, and there's all these sorts of things. However, it still comes back to the question: they are real, like it's. But let's I tell you what, let's bring it back down under, because I wanted to ask you, because like I said before, there's only so many lines of research you can do, and I showed you some of the stuff that I've been looking at before we turn the mics on. You focused your attention on the Aussie experience, the Aussie experiences that you would have researched and had a look at through those photos, and there's some really interesting stuff. What would you say? Well, which one do you like the most? Which one makes you question the most, or which?
Well, I certainly find Westall to be one of the most intriguing, just purely based on the sheer number of witnesses. I mean, albeit children, and we know children have imaginations, but I don't think you can rule imagination
they all tell the
out.
Same story. Not when they all tell the same story.
No, exactly right. And that's why I think there's a lot of parallels, even though the circumstances are different and what was witnessed was different. I think there's a lot of parallels with the Ariel school sighting in Zimbabwe, with a lot of parallels with Westall. And you had one of the adult teachers was also witness to the incident, and then the fact that he was told to basically shut up and not talk about it after the event, raises a lot of eyebrows. And the fact that you have reports of the then Department of Supply allegedly compiling a pretty significant and bulky report on the Westall incident, and now all these years later it's mysteriously vanished and no one can find it. So
they thoroughly interviewed all the children, the teachers, and everyone else like that. Then they went away. They came back. Literally, the men in black came back and said, "By the way, don't ever talk about this again."
And so I think the Department of Defence and the Royal Australian Air Force have never provided...
who were the jets in the sky?
They've never provided an explanation as to what they determined the Westall incident... if it was prosaic, well, what was the prosaic explanation? I don't think we've ever had...
No, I've never seen a good explanation of that. Never.
No, and so I think Westall is certainly a cold case that warrants... further analysis and a revisit. So that's one that I certainly am fascinated by. And I'm originally from Sydney, but I moved down to Melbourne a number of years ago with my wife, and I would love to take some time out at some point to pay the Westall site a visit, and just because there's nothing quite like being on the ground and in a location where something anomalous happened, because you can just immerse yourself in the environment, and your imagination goes wild, and you start really connecting with the surround. So Westall for me has always been a fascinating one, but a lot of the historical cases as well, like my connection to this topic in an Australian context is a unique one, in that my uncle on my mother's side, his name was Des Barnsley, and he was a project manager for a top secret project called RESAT back in the 1960s, which was based out of Woomera in South Australia.
Yeah, which is the old nuclear testing range for those.
Yeah, so he was based at Woomera for a number of years, and there have been a lot of historical reports. I mean, you can just pull them up out of the National Archives of Australia. A lot of the reports of anomalous objects and unusual lights in the sky occurring at Woomera, and he was based there and responsible for launching Australia's very first satellite into orbit. So, and sadly, he passed away a number of years ago. So I never had an opportunity
Yeah, I was going to ask, is he still? We need to talk
grill him.
about
I would have loved to, but his wife, my aunt, is still alive, and I hope at some point that I can pick her brain. But our conversations to date have been that she doesn't recall Des ever talking to her about any reports of anomalous objects.
Well, look,
or
I mean, they're all under disclosure agreements back then as well.
Well,
I mean, this is post
yeah.
World War II, nuclear technology, all that stuff. Like there would have been a lot of paperwork there.
That's right. But it was interesting that there was, a UFO group, a UFO organization that was dedicated to the region in and around Woomera at the time. So, and it's not just isolated to Woomera, and that's not the only military installation where there have been reports over decades of anomalous activity. You've got the Harold D. Holt base in Western Australia. You've got Maralinga, which is also in South Australia. You've got the Pine Gap in Northern Territory, which is jointly operated by the US and Australia. So, and all of those sites are heavily featured in Ross Coulthard's book In Plain Sight, where he documents a lot of the cases. So, but to come back to your original question, Westall is one that I continue to be fascinated by to this day, because there's so many more questions than there are answers.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think that was a really good answer, because what I found as well, I knew about Westall. Like Westall's, I was trying to see if I could find it. I've got a alien book behind me that I've had since I was 12. So, I bought it with my pocket money when I was 12, and it's all tattered, and like I've had it for that long. You know what I mean?
You've read it a few times.
Oh yeah, a few times. Yeah. However, finding Anthony and finding yourself, and you've opened up another big rabbit hole for me. I had no idea the amount of sightings. I mean, have you had an experience? That was going to be another question.
No, I haven't. It's on my bucket list to have a sighting before I leave this mortal coil, if I'm fortunate enough. But I've never seen a UAP. I experienced what I thought was some form of paranormal activity a number of years ago, where I was doing some editing on, because I studied filmmaking, and I was doing some editing, and I had a glass of cold water on my table, and it literally moved quite a few inches across the table, and I was like, hang on, is there some unknown force that's caught? But it turned out I did some homework, and the condensation on the outside of the glass and underneath, it's not uncommon for it to slide. So I kind of came up with a prosaic explanation there, but no, never seen a UFO UAP, but would love to. And that's why I'm fascinated whenever I chat with someone that has, because I really try and put myself in their shoes as to what they were experiencing in that very moment. So
yeah, I had look, my listeners have heard this, but I know you haven't. I've had two experiences. First one, 13, 14 I lived in Ballarat for a long time. Grew up in Ballarat, Victoria. And back in the early 90s, we didn't have phones or anything. We actually used to lie on the driveway and look at the stars over nighttime. And me and a couple of friends lying on the driveway looking up at the stars, and this thing starts sort of bouncing around the stars.
Jolting around. Yeah.
Jolting around. And I'm like, what is that? I'm like, oh, Dad's telescope. Dad had this little handheld telescope. Ran inside, came out, went to raise the telescope to try and look at this thing, and gone.
Just gone. Oh, wow.
And there was four of us there, and everybody went, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that. Was it bouncing around the sky? I said, yes, it was bouncing around the sky. Wow. And that was X-Files. That was all that time. Like, oh, wow, like that's really trippy. And then years later, this was about 2022, 7 years ago, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Had a Min light experience in far western Queensland.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah,
right.
Where, long story short, traveling home very early in the morning, tired after a 3-week swing, and like 2-3 o'clock in the morning, middle of nowhere, Western Queensland. Now, we were in oil and gas at that time, and it was our job to know where rigs were and all that sort of stuff. So we knew where all the stuff was. This big long stretch of road, this light just comes on, probably left-hand side, looked a few Ks out, and we're like, there's nothing out there. The rail line's not there. There's no road out there. There's nothing out there. And this thing never moved, never got further away, never got closer. And it did feel like it was looking at us. And this went on for 10, 15 minutes, to the point where, like, when it first started happening, we mentioned it, and then it's like, are you still seeing that light? Like, we weren't real sure, you know what I mean? Like, we weren't real sure if what we were seeing is what we were seeing.
Yeah.
And then it's like, yeah, no, that's actually happening. What's going on here? And it sort of started. And then as all of a sudden it just winked out, and that's it.
Wow.
But it never got further away, it never got closer, it never dimmed, it never brightened. It felt like it was watching us. And then, yeah.
It would have made for an interesting car ride for the rest of the several hours afterwards.
Yeah,
I imagine you couldn't stop talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, you got to remember, we're doing, let's say, 100 Ks an hour, 140. You know what I mean? So it's not like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like, we traveled in that 15 minutes, we traveled X amount of meters, and it never did anything. And we just stayed there. It was very, very odd. Yeah. And the thing is, if you actually ask people, especially a lot of blokes that have done a lot of FIFO work out in the bush, and, you know, cow cockies and rangers, and, you know, most people have a story, don't they? This is the whole point. Most people have seen something or felt something, or, you know, this phenomenon is pervades our consciousness on so many levels. You know, I thought about, you're talking about the bases. I mean, that's another common story. That's happened in Europe. That's happened in America. That's happened in, you know, in all over the place, where these things will come over, they'll switch stuff off, or they'll stop a launch, or whatever. And again, I mean, the other question would be as well, Grant, why now? Why reveal this stuff now? Is it part of the manipulation process that we're all going through? Or is it, you know, why was it coming out now? Is it now becoming undeniable? It's interesting stuff, you know?
Yeah, I've often wondered that question, you know, and what people are seeing seems to be not always comparable with what's been cited in the past. So if you have, like, I'd take the McMinnville incident, for example, the McMinnville photo you have in the 50s and the 60s, you know, and is culture informing what people see, or is what people see informing culture? It could be one or both. I mean, the classic flying saucer, you know, was that something that was largely informed by, you know, what people were seeing in the sci-fi movies of the 50s and 60s versus, you know, a lot of, now we've kind of gone to more of a tic-tac shape and plasma shapes, and they're not necessarily defined by a shape with what people are seeing. These, you know, min lights is an example of that. So I don't know, it's interesting to see how how ufology and what people are reporting of seeing has evolved over the years. You know, could misidentification be a big part of it? Could hoaxing be a big part of it? Could the fact that more people are just simply more prone to, when they look up at the sky, they've got a device on them that they can use to capture something in the moment, you know, versus an analog camera back in the 50s. You know, digital cameras didn't really have a lot of moving parts back then. They certainly weren't digital, but these days everyone has a phone that they can just point at the sky and take an image. So I don't know. It's interesting to ponder and speculate why there seems to be a significant uptick in the number of reports and cases. Is it because we now simply have greater technology at our disposal to detect these things and photograph these things than we have in the past? Could be.
Or is it, I just had a bit of a thought then, I mean, because obviously, you know, World War II, the Foo Fighters and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's some fascinating stories with that, where, like, these fighter planes are not fighting each other. They're fighting these weird things in the sky. And, you know, you talk about the military bases. I mean, let's face it, as much as we like to escape into our content creation and stuff like that, the Earth is in an interesting place right now. You know what I mean? Maybe it's good to observe us in this time of chaos. I mean, this is the other thing too. Are these things drones? Are they, you know, I mean, I can't, you talked about the flying saucers. I can't leave that one alone without asking you whether you know about Otis Carr or Otis T. Carr.
No, I'm not familiar with
Well, you
with that
need to.
individual. I'll
Okay.
just need to
Well,
do some homework on that.
unlocking the code, mate. About a year ago, there's back-to-back episodes on Otis Carr. I
Okay.
recommend that you take
Oh,
some
good one.
time because my listeners have heard enough of that. However, long story short, he built a UFO or UAP
Hmm.
using technology and understanding of magnetics and propulsion that came from Tesla. Otis Carr was a protege of Tesla,
Hmm.
and very, very fascinating story. By all reports, and from all the research that I've seen that I did during that, and again, that's another subject, right? So a year ago, it was hard to find stuff on Otis Carr through
Mm.
general Google searches and stuff like that. You go on Google now, it's like the floodgates have been opened. There's so much. I've got the blueprints for his OTC X1 craft
Wow.
on my other computer.
And when was this? What
50s.
what? All right, in the 50s.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, the 50s, yeah. I mean, you go back to the 50s too, Grant, and you talk about anti-gravity tech. You can pull up, again, National Archives, mainly from the US, but in the early 50s, it was like anti-gravity is the next big thing. It'll be the next technology. And then somewhere around 54, 55, it just disappears. And
Mm.
no more talk about anti-gravity, which, like you said, 75 years, right, since the, famed Roswell. Maybe they had captured craft, or maybe they, and they saw it had anti-gravity tech and they thought they could reverse engineer it.
Mm.
And maybe they couldn't. I mean, that the other question I like to ask researchers like yourself, mate, is Bob Lazar, where do you land with Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I'd had a chat with gentlemen that I interviewed on my live stream not long before my channel, and I think a lot of people will shut Bob Lazar's story down because they see a big red flag with the education piece, the fact that they can't find any record of him ever studying at MIT or any of, there's no record of his tertiary education that he alleges. But I don't think you could write off his story solely on that, because if he worked for
Skunkworks,
a top secret project, then I doubt that whoever he works for, if it was a
some sort of
USAP
deep,
back then.
USAP or Skunkworks, or something like that.
If it was a WAVE unacknowledged special access program back then I can't imagine you would find any record of him having ever undertaken any education. That stuff's going to be under lock and key by the gatekeepers in the government. What I find interesting about Bob Lazar is that he had an opportunity. If he's been lying this whole time, you would think that when you're in front of a judge, being potentially with the potential of doing jail time for what was it, pandering and solicitation, when he was involved in the brothel business in the 90s. He didn't change his story even when he was in front of the judge. Everything stayed the same.
He's never ever changed his story,
and that's what's fascinating about Bob Lazar, is that he has never changed his story in the years ever since he came out under the cover of darkness as Dennis. On that interview
1989
with George Knapp, 89. He hasn't changed his story. Sure, there maybe be subtle differences or subtle nuances with things that change over time, but that could be, you could put that down to someone's memory just changing over time as well. So I'm still very much, I want to believe Bob Lazar's story because I find it an incredibly fascinating one. And the element 115 is intriguing, and the fact that he reported seeing 9 craft that had been recovered, one from an archaeological dig. So there are a lot of aspects to Bob Lazar's story that are incredibly fascinating. Chris Lato always says, trust but verify, and I think that's a a great mantra to go by. But we
absolutely.
can. There's unfortunately not a lot to Bob's story that can be verified, and that's
But interestingly, at the same time, Grant, there's a lot of stuff that has been verified, like the scanners and there's
that is
bits and
true.
pieces of
You raise a
technology.
really good point. Yeah, and obviously his W-2 form, even though people question the veracity of that document, the fact that he knew where to go at a certain day of the week at a certain
Have
time
UFO hosting parties on a Wednesday.
to take his friends out and see things in the sky. So there's a lot of pieces to Bob Lazar's story that I think are worth continuing to keep an open mind on,
And also the
rather than just
way,
shut.
yeah, absolutely. And also the way the Tic Tacs behave and all
Yeah.
those sort of stuff. Like he echoes that. I mean, look, I believe Bob. However, like you, I want to believe so bad. You know what I mean? I really, really do. Which, because of the years and thousands of hours of research, like you say, I like trust but verify. That's really good. We work on the 1% rule, right? What if 1% of what if 1% of any theory is true? I think that's fair enough, right? You always question. You know what I mean? Always question. We like to say around here, Grant, that we're sophomaniacs, mate. A sophomaniac is someone who has the delusion that they're intelligent.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we don't know what we don't know a lot of the times, and I mean, I think Bob's a fascinating character, and from what I've seen of him in the interviews that he has given, he certainly doesn't come across that. I mean, I think if he wanted to be in this for the fame and the fortune, he's had every opportunity to do that. But okay, he authored a book documenting his experience, which was the release of that was funded by TTSA, which I don't think is necessarily a red flag. But I think if Bob really wanted to take advantage of his story and manipulate the community into believing it in the interest of fame and fortune, he hasn't taken that opportunity. He's remained relatively recluse. I mean, he's got his business, United Nuclear, which I think he's very happy with and how that's doing. So the fact that he's kind of trying to live as much of a normal life as he possibly could,
and it needs to be said too that with the Netflix thing, anything he got from that, he actually donated it to the local high school to build a new science lab for that school.
Yeah.
So he didn't even pocket the cash from the Netflix documentary.
No, so
you would think you would, like it's totally fine if you did, however, he didn't. And he never has.
And I mean, there's, I mean, in some of the early documentaries that were done on him, I think it was, there were some creative choices that probably the producers of that documentary made, where he rocks up a dirt road in a Corvette, which looks a bit of in this day and age, looks like a bit of a wank. But that's probably a decision that the producers made to kind of sex up his story a little bit. I don't rule Bob out at all. I think his story is certainly one worth keeping an open mind on. And because if things come out that, I mean, if with what's going on at the moment with the U.S. Congress, with the hopefully eventual signing of the Intelligence Authorization Act, where Congress is going to start calling up whistleblowers that have knowledge of a lot of these. Yeah,
and they don't have they can't be affected by it.
There's anti-reprisal legislation and whistleblower protections that are going to be put in place. And I mean, I would just love the day that Eric Davis and Admiral Tom Wilson are called up in front of Congress, probably behind closed doors, to get to the bottom of the Wilson Davis notes once and for all. Because if there was a crash retrieval program that the US government has been operating successfully since Roswell 75 years ago, then that potentially adds some credence to maybe some of the things that Bob Lazar has spoken about at a secure installation offshoot of Area 51 at S4.
S4,
yeah. So I mean, I would love to I would love to see more information come out on Bob's corroborative evidence that comes out on Bob's story. And from what you hear Jeremy Corbell say occasionally from time to time, along with George Knapp, that there's more information that hasn't been revealed or released on Bob Lazar that could potentially add a bit more credibility in the eye of those that are a little bit leaning to he's just in it for the fame and the fortune, or they don't really know his story. So
yeah, that's right. Look, I mean, Bob believes Bob, and I want to believe Bob, so we'll believe Bob. I think that's where we'll, you know.
I find him to be a fascinating individual, and I certainly don't rule him out based on just the education, the lack of education.
Well, I know that I know Joe Rogan has said on the podcast a few times about Bob, where he's basically said, listen, the education thing, don't worry about it. He goes, I can't tell you what Bob told me because I said I wouldn't. However, understand that if you heard what Bob actually did, like you say, some underground skunk works, who knows, you know, propulsion. You got to remember the guy strapped a rocket and a jet motor to most things. You know what I mean? Like he just did that for fun. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's, and I agree. It's a very fascinating story. You know, I think Jeremy Corbell's work is very fascinating. I think it was a shame the To the Stars Academy didn't really do much, and now Blink-182's back out all of a sudden, charging $4 billion for a ticket. However, there's so much stuff. Let's bring it back home. Let's bring it back down under. So, your key part of what you're trying to do, and I was trying to follow the links to do my own letter to my senator, mate. Don't worry, cool. I'll be doing that.
Good man, very good.
In the future, just need to do it on my computer. I think I've got to bring it up and do it on the computer, and I'll be doing that. However, Australia officially. So what's the word? They officially investigated. What was the program? When did it stop? When did it start? What information have you found about our program that we?
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, Australia has had almost as long of a history investigating UFOs or UAP now as much as the US has, because the Royal Australian Air Force for many decades, from the 50s through to the mid 90s, had a formal policy that was called the Unusual Aerial Sightings Policy. They referred to it as UAS in Australia as opposed to UFO. And UAS is terminology that's been used by actually the US many decades ago. So for a long time, Australia had an unusual aerial sightings policy, and it was within the remit of the Royal Australian Air Force to investigate, to record and report on UAS, UFO incidents, and they had, one of the roles of personnel that worked in the Royal Australian Air Force was to investigate a lot of these reports that were coming in, because there was significantly a decent chunk of them from all of those military installation sites that I talked about in the past, and a lot of reports coming in from the general public. And in 1996, following policy recommendation from Brett Biddington in 1993, in 1996, the Royal Australian Air Force ceased investigating UFOs. They said, no, we find, and in air quotes, we find no compelling or no scientific or other compelling reason to further devote resources to the investigation of
weather balloons,
UFOs.
Lots of weather balloons.
Yeah, they said no, we can't. That basically, I said we can't identify. We can't explain 3% of the reports that come in. So we're just going to abandon our analysis of this topic, and we're going to refer people that want to report a UFO, whether they're members of the general public or military personnel, refer them to their local law enforcement. So basically, call the cops and report that you've seen a UFO. What are the cops going to do about it, to be honest, other than take a police statement? Or reach out to your civilian UFO organization, like the MUFONs and the various organizations that have been in operation around the country for decades. So the fact that the Royal Australian Air Force was unable to explain 3% of the cases that they investigated.
Do we have a number of how many they reported? Is there any?
It was in the thousands. It was over the course of the decades that they investigated UAS, UFO. It was in the thousands. And Keith Basterfield did a really good comprehensive report on the Australia's history with UAS, UFO, the Australian government's involvement in it over those decades. But I mean, the fact that they can't identify 3% of the things that they've investigated, to me, is enough of a compelling reason to devote resources to the recording and reporting of it going forward.
I mean, that's hundreds of incidents. If it's in the thousands, that's hundreds of incidents that are unable to be explained.
So I'll give you an example. So 25th of June of last year, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence releases its preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena, and indicated that of the 144 reports of UAP from US government sources over a date range of 2004 through to late 2021, they were only able to identify one of those 144 cases. So they had a success rate of less than 1% in identifying
these things actually are.
So 99% of the things that they received, that they looked at, they were unable to explain. Now that figure has now since blown out to above and beyond 400 reports from US government sources now since the UAP task force. It then went on to AOI MSG, and now it's since gone into ARROW, the All Domains Resolution Office. The acronyms change all the time, so I can't really remember. But so I reached out to Roger Stankovic, and if I pronounced his name wrong, sorry, Roger. I inquired with him. So he's the director of MUFON ANZ, and I asked him. I said, out of interest, how many reports did MUFON ANZ receive across a comparable date range that the UAPTF, the UAP task force looked at in
similar time range,
compiling their report, preliminary assessment. And Roger confirmed that from 2004 to late 2021, or the start of this year, there were 1,158, I believe, reports submitted to MUFON ANZ. And sure, okay, understandably, there'll be a large percentage of those that can be attributed to misidentification, prosaic explanations and so on. But even if you take that figure of 1,158, if you take 3% of that figure, which is apparently the percentage that the Royal Australian Air Force gave as to they weren't able to explain of all of the reports they investigated, 3% of 1,158, that's still about 35 cases. So if there's 35 true unknowns, true UAP, that are flying with impunity in Australian airspace, both restricted and commercial, then that should be enough of a compelling reason, including the fact that our US ally and Five Eyes partner was not able to identify 143 out of 144 cases of UAP. That should be enough of a compelling reason to revisit your position, formally revisit your position on UAP. And the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force has completely ignored the findings of ODNI's preliminary assessment. They haven't looked at they haven't seen any of the classified data in the classified version of ODNI's preliminary assessment, nor have they looked at any UFO data since 1996 because they ceased investigation of the topic. So how can they make a determination that no, there's nothing, move along folks, there's nothing to see here, when they're clearly not even willing to look at the data that the strongest military power on the planet has amassed over a significant date range collection. And that absolutely mind boggles me. Why is the Australian Department of Defence not taking this topic seriously when it clearly poses potential national security issues and
it's a clear and present threat, absolutely,
and more importantly, safety of flight issue, not just for military aviators but also for commercial pilots and general aviation pilots. And I think the Australian Department of Defence is doing a massive disservice to members of the Australian Defence Force by not giving them sensible say something, see something reporting mechanisms that they can put in place to report UAP. Because at the moment, the only reporting...
Do you think that there's no program? I mean, I don't...
Well, publicly...
There's no official program.
So what we're told publicly might be very different to what is told behind closed doors. But at the moment, so the Defence Aviation Safety Authority, DASA, and the commercial equivalent is the Civil Aviation Authority, CASA. So the only reporting mechanisms that exist across those two bodies is if a pilot experience or folks on the ground identify a near collision, so a near miss, an incident or an accident, that's what they are required to report. Yeah. If they observe a UAP, which could become a safety of flight issue because it could become a near miss, they're not required. There is no special encouragement given to pilots and aviators to report a UAP. And there is no reporting mechanism that currently exists to enable them to do that. So there's still, I think, a very much a level of stigma and ridicule that's associated with the topic. The fact that I'm sure that there are a lot of military aviators and commercial pilots out there that have seen something, but they haven't said anything because, one, they don't have a mechanism to say something or report it, and two, if they do raise it with their higher ups, the joke's going to be, they'll be the joke of the
Independence Day will be playing at the base.
Yeah, night. Exactly. Cue the X-Files music and you start getting, ridicule and jokes being made, and there's fear of reprisals that you might not get a promotion, or, I think that's still and to their credit, the Pentagon is making a concerted effort to lower the stigma or crumble the walls of stigma that have long plagued.
I mean, he's hoping. He's hoping. I mean, because that sort of leads into, like, everyone needs to go listen to Ryan Graves. He's on Friedman's podcast and Joe Rogan's podcast. Both of those things are well worth a listen. However, he was talking about, he's an F-18 pilot. They're spotting these things over the ocean, half a dozen a day. There was a couple of near misses. One flew in between two fighters. They kept going to cap points. They kept jamming radar. They'd see these things on radar, go there, and it wasn't there. So that's all compelling, and it all adds to the pile. But what I immediately thought of, because I'd always come back to Australia, we have the same fighters, Grant. We have the same F-18 Super Hornet fighters with the upgraded radar that would have been trickled down through the fleet to our current, obviously F-35s again would be better again. However, the F-18 fighters that he was flying back in 2014, we fly now. I mean, I see them in and out of Amberley all the time. So then the question is, if they have the same radar technology, how many are they seeing? Right? I mean,
that are going unreported. Absolutely.
Going unreported, right?
I mean, all you need to do is listen to Ross Coulthard, and one of the things I admire about Ross Coulthard is that he's an investigative journalist, and the golden rule of investigative journalism is you don't reveal your sources. And so I think there are a lot of folks that are current active members of the armed forces and those that are maybe retired that are prepared, they're willing and prepared to come forward and talk to Ross on or off the record, because there is a level of comfort and assurance in their eyes knowing that Ross is not going to rat me out if I talk to him. And Ross has said repeatedly that he continues to receive reports from current and former members of the Australian Defence Force that have seen something, they've experienced or sighted an anomalous object in the line of duty or above a military installation. So there's clearly things are happening above our Australian skies. It's just not getting reported because there's no reporting mechanism, and there's no special encouragement, and there's still a degree of stigma that's associated with the topic down under.
I mean, and then if you go, as you say, mention Anthony from Encounters Down Under again, you look at his work and all the people that have come forward and
that he's talking to
about all these experiences that these people have had. And again, not dissimilar. There's some different experiences, but a lot of them have common threads that run through them, which you find. But these common threads are not only here in Australia, but overseas as well. I mean, you know, we come to learn that Russia's quite interested in it as well. Is we said France before, like European countries. Everybody's reporting this thing. This is I don't understand, Grant. Like I was talking to him, like I said, you know, there's craft in the air that can jam our signals at will, right? Which we saw with the gimbal video. We actually saw the symbols get jammed. Not the symbols, the signals get jammed, right? They maneuver on a dime. They are anti-gravitic in their nature. They can descend from 70,000 feet, which we don't operate at, to 1,000 feet in a second, which was reported many times through the radar operators out of the, you know, the Princeton,
Nimitz,
and all that sort of stuff. And again, that wasn't an isolated incident. That's just the information that came out. It's now being said that happens all the time. So it leads, I mean, it's hard not to be conspiracy minded. Like, what is going? It's like, I was talking to a mate the other day, and it's like, yeah. Oh, we're seeing 7 UFOs a day. Don't worry, just prepare to bomb the desert. You'll be fine, right? There seems to be a cognitive dissonance there. It just makes you wonder. Like, do they?
Yeah,
Do
that's
they
the
know?
big.
Do they
That's
know?
the big question.
Is it advanced drone technology? Like I wonder, you know, in the current level of chaos that we exist in, and the wrong speak and the disinformation and this, that, and the other, that we wake up one day and they go, oh, remember the Space Force that Trump created 5 years ago? Oh yeah, we've been working behind the scenes. We've got galactic spaceships now, by the way, just so you know. Yeah, just happened, right? You know, I mean, it's hard not to be conspiracy minded about some of this stuff, isn't it?
I agree. It's the big question that I've got and a lot of people as Australia have, and certainly the question that's on Senator Peter Whish-Wilson's mind. And to date, he's the only Australian senator that has publicly had the courage and gumption to ask questions about UFO, UAP in an Australian context. Why is the Australian Department of Defence not taking this topic seriously when our US ally and Five Eyes partner, and not just the US, but Canada, a Five Eyes partner,
and UK
is also,
I think, as well. The UK,
unfortunately, the UK is very much in step with Australia. Australia and the UK are not wanting to touch this issue, and the UK has got a history of investigating this with the Condon report that came out and so on. But the UK and Australia are very mum on this topic, and there's a couple of reasons why I think that could be. One is that the Royal Australian Air Force and Department of Defence is playing an ignorance is bliss card, and they're thinking, well,
the Australian government's pretty good at that one. They've got that move down pat. Just ignore it and don't worry about it.
And it will go away. And if we don't talk about it, then the public's not going to worry about it. Yeah. That's one option. That's one scenario. Is it also the fact that if the Royal Australian Air Force was not able to explain 3% of the reports of UAP that it investigated throughout the course of its UAS policy, and now they revisit their position and start up a new similar program, is that what will public perception be on that? Is that if the goal of the Royal Australian Air Force is to maintain air dominance, and that is a clear statement that we don't have control over our skies by implementing a new program, is that going to result in a loss of confidence and trust in the Australian public that we don't know what's flying around our skies with impunity? There's that one.
Well, I think number one, the loss of confidence and trust in the average Aussie of the government
happened long ago.
Yeah, that's not a new thing. We already don't trust them at all.
I agree with you, and I mean,
so tell us about UFOs, man. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and you look at the debacle of the Australian government forking out almost $1 billion to the French government for its botched nuclear submarine contract. I mean, far out. Give me a break. So perceived lack of trust by the public is certainly. It could be that there's also a degree of stigma, within the halls of Australian government and defence leadership. I would not be surprised if there are folks that, I mean, I've got proof of that. I mean, Freedom of Information Act documents that I've secured the release of clearly show that there are select members of the Australian Department of Defence that are still treating the topic like a joke.
Yeah.
They're making jokes about it in emails and written correspondence. So there are folks that are clearly not taking it seriously.
I mean, if you to believe Jeremy Corbell as well, like these things operating over military operations now as well. Like apparently they'd see him in Iraq, they'd see him in Syria, like where all these military operations are taking place. They would be actively observing. I mean, this thing, as I say, it's faster. It is a clear and present threat, you would think, and that's what Ryan Graves was saying. So listen, it's not about the fact that I'm a UFO nut. It's about the fact that there's a craft in the sky that I can't explain, and I'm a fighter pilot. It's my job to defend the skies. And no one wants to talk about this stuff. No one wants to explore exactly what it is and where it actually came from, right?
Yeah, and that's why I say I think it's a huge disservice that the U.S. Department of Defense has been guilty of for a long time, and by the Royal Australian Air Force not taking this topic seriously and not implementing sensible say something reporting mechanisms, they're potentially going to be that's potentially a massive breach of duty of care, because if we know that UFOs are real because the US government has told us that.
The other issue, though, is Grant, is that I don't think the more the US government releases, the more questions I have as well. I don't trust them either. That's the other problem. Like, how much is disinformation that they're releasing?
That's true, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is a big element of top secret technology. Black.
That was going to be my next question. I mean, what percentage of this stuff do you think is actual advancement in technology? I mean, if you think from so let's take Bob Lazar's story, right? 1989, they still couldn't harness or understand how to operate the motor that operated the UAP or UFOs. Mm-hmm. That was 33 years ago, right? So how have they cracked the code on the Element 115, or have they cracked the code on the fusion, the magnetic generator that causes these things to propel? Have they been able to reverse engineer more than we understand? I mean, what percentage do you think is that? I mean,
I certainly think it is a percent. There is a percentage of UFO reports can certainly be attributed to top secret technology that is being tested. Without a doubt, there is technology that's coming out of private aerospace that's being tested, whether it be over civilian, over civilian airspace, or that people because they want to test what is the public's reaction going to be to a craft of this nature. So I would not be surprised if there is top secret technology that's being tested that people are identifying or reporting as UAP. But if I can kind of highlight, there's a gentleman by the name of, I don't know if you've heard of a gentleman by the name of Frank Milburn. He's UK counterintelligence, and that has its own issues in itself. But his contacts have informed him, if you believe what he says to be true, that and this goes along with what folks like Ross Coulthard and Louis Elizondo and Chris Mellon and others have said, is that, and even Eric Davis, that if there is a crash retrieval program that the US government has in fact had since, say, Roswell, and that the programs have been that compartmentalized that everything operates in these silos and there's no collaboration, no one talks to one another, and they basically shelve their analysis at decades at a time because they can't understand how the technology works, and they can't
what it even is.
They can't efficiently reverse engineer it. I mean, that's exactly what Frank Milburn's been saying, that his sources have told him that the US government has been able to reverse engineer, in air quotes, a shitty version of a UAP. So I would not be surprised if there is in fact a crash retrieval program, and we have attempted to reverse engineer this technology. that our efforts have maybe not failed completely, but we're not able to replicate the 5 observables that these craft, they seemingly defy the law of known physics. So I certainly suspect that there is an element of this that can absolutely be attributed to waived, unacknowledged special access programs and black budget technology that. I mean, if you look at Area 51, Area 51 was responsible for producing the U2,
F-117,
the Blackbird, and
SR-71,
SR-71, and you've got the stealth fighter, and the general public didn't know about those technologies or those crafts for several decades after they'd come off the production line. So I wouldn't be surprised if what private aerospace is able to do today would certainly be pretty crazy if you were to see something in the sky.
Well, I mean the B-2, the big wedge stealth bomber. Look, it was very, very. It's been down under. I don't know if it came down to Melbourne, but it's been doing exercises here in Brisbane this year.
Yeah,
and
right.
I've never seen one of those things up close. It doesn't look like it should be able to fly. It came over my house pretty low because I'm not far from Amberley Air Base. And the interesting thing about that is that the cross section of it's unbelievable. Like you watch it fly away and it just disappears because it's so thin. Because it's just so thin. It's just a big wedge.
The wafer,
just a wafer, and it's just like you watch it and it's gone. But you hear it and it's very quiet. Like there's a whole heap of weird tech about that. I mean, the other thing is too, Grant, you got to go into what did we get from the Nazis at the end of World War II? I mean, Hitler was very, very deep into the
he was
the occult and all that sort of stuff,
the
deep into that stuff.
Yeah, secret machines and what they were able to. I mean, there's so many stories of. I mean, you have the Nazi bell, the De Glock. I mean, again, that's there's a lot of mystery and intrigue associated with that conversation in itself. But I mean, it is interesting that you have all of these prominent German scientists recruited by the US, which end up being part of Operation Paperclip, to develop in complete secrecy the atomic bomb. And you have then Warner von Braun, who, if you believe, I don't believe everything that Dr. Stephen Greer says, but if you believe what he says to be true, and that Warner von Braun told his assistant, Carol Rosin, on his deathbed that, there is this false flag event that the gatekeepers of this technology are trying to bring to fruition with this cosmic hoax of an alien invasion. That it's all basically an effort or a ploy to continue to fund the military industrial complex. And I mean, war is what makes there is money in war. So if you can keep the military alive and throw funding their way, and that's why there are some fears, that the effort that has been undertaken, to what degree, to what extent, no one knows, is there a part of it that is just a massive ploy or a manipulation to have the US government invest billions, if not trillions of dollars into the Space Force so that they can maintain a competitive advantage or as Danny Sheehan often says, global spectrum dominance. So is that an element of it as well? So it's, there are so many sides, both sides of the coin, I think, have validity to them. But again, what's truth, what's half truth, what's misdirection, what's misinformation? It's hard to sift through the BS sometimes because we simply don't know.
Well, look, firstly, mate, don't worry about saying BS. Sometimes shit needs to be fucking emphasized.
You guys just get the bullshit out there.
Okay, don't. It's okay. We don't swear much. However, if we need to swear, it's okay.
We get it out.
That's all right. We're Aussies, mate. We can't not swear.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah,
No.
yeah. We're pretending if we don't.
Exactly. And if people don't like it, as Ross Coulthard loves to say, fuck them.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. Yeah, we're not. It's not f-bombs every 2 seconds.
No.
However, look, I think you're totally right. I was just sort of thinking, where do I want to take this conversation next? We've covered some amazing ground, and the question. It's hard not to see a false flag. Because that's another dark rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. I've been down that one. You learn that Operation Northwoods. You've got the Vietnam War. I can't remember that one. You've got just some twisted stuff that has taken place as false flags to implement different things. I mean, you talk about the military-industrial complex. If you look at, there's Dwight D. Eisenhower's final speech, that amazing speech that he gave about the military-industrial complex, and we see it in evidence now. I mean, I did I've got a couple of US boys that do some work with me, and those guys come with receipts, and it's the stuff that they're showing me about, this complex that exists to wage war on humanity, basically. And yeah, there is that. There's going to be a false flag, so we can fight the aliens, and the aliens are us. Or, but what I thought, I thought we'd go. Well, I thought I'd just ask you. Okay, so objective perspective aside, right? So objective perspective aside, making sure, because I do the same, mate. Any of the subjects that I talk about, I've looked at both sides of the argument, and I've decided which side I fall.
Which is important. I think you have to look at you've got to keep everything on the table and
be willing to change that perspective when new information comes to light.
Exactly, because our own confirmation bias sits with us all the time, and you have to look at all pieces of the puzzle. Sometimes, no matter how crazy they may look and sound at face value,
So speaking of crazy, so let's step out of objective perspective, right? What is your personal thoughts about where these things come from? What are they? Where these things come from? What is your personal perspective?
Yeah, so I actually think I've listened to quite a lot of the stuff that Michael Masters has talked about, and I'm actually interviewing a gentleman on my channel next month. A good friend who's he's a veteran, he's an engineer, and he's kind of self-taught on theoretical physics, and he has come up with a theory that what a lot of UAP that are being reported and seen are actually, quantum echoes of future humans, of us in the future. Because they have mastered quantum travel, and they've been able to manipulate, the
space-time continuum.
Yes, space-time, and the Higgs boson field that may be associated with that. That's what gives matter its mass. So they're able to, unlock. They have the technology in their future to do a lot of the things that UAP are reported of doing, the five observables, and they're being observed in our present. So they're us in the future that are able to, that have mastered to a degree some form of time travel. So there's so many questions that I've got that I'm going to ask Brad Voorhees when I sit down with him next month. But I think that's an element to it that I want to explore and learn a little bit more about. But I don't discredit that it could also be extraterrestrial, interdimensional, ultra-terrestrial, as well as top secret technology. I have a sneaking suspicion that it actually could be all of those things.
Yeah, I was going to say D, all the above. Yeah,
exactly. I don't think it's limited to, and you've now got a smorgasbord of possible explanations as to what UAP are and who is piloting them. I mean, you've got Van Neumann probes as well, self-replicating AI. That if there is a intelligent non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial intelligence that is sending probes capable of interstellar travel that can self-replicate, that is possibly an explanation for what's being observed as well. I mean, who knows? I think it's just the possibilities of what it could be is so much greater than just ET.
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, way to tell me everything without telling me anything. I appreciate that answer. But no, look, I agree with you. The thing is, the other question is, they're always going into the ocean. What's under the ocean, right? This is, or most of these Tic Tacs and these, the 5 observables that we see with these military fighters so far that we understand, the vast majority are over the ocean. And, we always seem to forget because, whatever the distraction is at the moment, that we know less about our oceans than we do about our near Earth space.
100%. I mean, I mean, the Mariana Trench. Who's James Cameron's been down there for a short period of time, but we know less about what's within the Earth than we do. We know more about what's on the face of the Earth or in our skies than we do what's in the Earth and under our oceans. I mean, what's so special about the ocean that attracts a lot of these UAP is that, some people suggest that maybe their propulsion system is very much hydrogen based and there's an abundance of hydrogen in the oceans. So is that something that they're using as a fueling mechanism or a fueling station? Who knows? But it is interesting that you certainly have an abundance of reports of UAP appearing across bodies of water, and in the water as well. Transmedium craft above military installations and restricted airspace, and less over civilian areas. I mean, you certainly get reports of UAP over civilian airspace, but again, is it because we simply don't have the same level of technology that our military brothers and sisters do to detect a lot of the stuff?
Radar.
They've got all the toys. We've just got a smartphone and a telescope.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, from my perspective, the research that I sort of do, the other thing about the ultra-terrestrial is that I think the linear, we were cavemen in loincloths and then now we're the most awesome version of ourselves that's ever existed. It's patently untrue. And, we don't want to start that conversation now. However, long story short, I do believe that, the human race or even multiple civilizations, Grant, as well, like, we're focused on Homo sapiens sapiens because that's who we are. However, who knows? If the Earth is truly 3.5 billion years old, as they say it is, we've got no idea, right? I mean, we take into account the, as one of my offsiders says, it helps out with the podcast, the dinosaurs were here for 130 million years. What did they do? Did they never evolve? That might be a crazy question, but is it? You know what I mean? Like you've got to ask these questions. And I think the human, even the Homo sapiens sapiens in the last, whatever it is, 2 million years, I think now we're sort of saying, how many times did we go up and down? Right. We took 150 years to go from horseback to landing on the moon. You're saying in what, 150, 200, 300,000 years that we did nothing. We were just bows and arrows. Yeah. There's a cycle of time, a galactic cycle of time, Grant, that we exist under that needs to be observed. However, the thing is, if you were to survive cataclysm, okay, we talk about what's underneath the Earth, underneath the ocean. The ocean would be one of the most stable places to survive a cataclysm that was on the surface of the planet, right? Also, one of the things that we find all over the planet is tunnel systems. There is tunnel systems under most continents. There's apparently a tunnel system that runs from the Mediterranean all the way through to the UK. Right? There's an underground system. You got the Hopi Indians is the good one, where it's like these people came out from under the earth, right? got the Hopi, took them under the ground and said, listen, there's big trouble coming. Come under the ground with us and we'll let you back out when it's safe to get back out again.
Yeah.
Now that's the prominent story, but that's another story that's echoed across other indigenous cultures. So what if there has, the other one that they saw the other day, they're doing like basically massive ground penetrating radar trying to get to the core, and they're finding inland oceans and inland caverns that are massive, right? That classic geology, the magnet ball, the magma, and that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
We've got no idea.
It kind of brings to mind that classic movie, Journey to the Center of the Earth. I remember watching that as a kid because there. I mean, if you look at, you talk about, Homo sapiens sapiens. I mean, it wasn't too long ago, certainly in our lifetime, that Homo floresiensis was discovered in where is it off?
In Indonesia.
In Indonesia, and you have. I mean, another big interest of mine is following the reports of Yowie, or also known as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or and I think
Australopithecus,
or even Gigantopithecus, which was a 10 plus feet, and the fact that there are reports of a bipedal hominid that has been seen in all corners of the globe that's managed to avoid human detection for I mean, how long have they potentially, if they do exist, how long have they shared the planet with Homo sapiens sapiens?
Well, the other one you can't, and this is an interesting, a few episodes back now. We're in part of this book that we're doing. Max looks at evidence of dragons and dinosaurs, right? So it's like, draw me a dinosaur if you don't know what a dinosaur looks like. Right? Draw me one if you don't know what one is. Okay, understanding that paleontology for dinosaurs has only been around for a couple of hundred years max, right? There's these ecostones that have like brontosauruses carved into them. There's evidence of pterosaurs messing with communities in the jungles and this sort of stuff. Like, where does a dragon come from? Again, draw a dragon for me. If you didn't, all the stories of dragons, if you didn't see one, draw one for me.
Yeah.
How do we have such detailed pictures, or whether they be drawings, but again, draw one for me if you don't know what it looks like. There's so much evidence of that. And the other thing that people don't get, I mean, I think we get it more down under because of the size of Australia, and if those of us that have done a little bit of traveling, we understand truly how big this place is, right? And then if Australia is that big, then how big is the world? Like, you think about African continent. On most globes, Africa is misrepresented for its size. It's much larger than it looks on most globes in order to fit the continent on the ball, basically. There's no way that we've walked every inch of this planet, even now, right? There's no way. I mean, they still find tribes every now and again in the middle of the jungle that have never seen anything. They're still using bow and arrow and spears and stuff. We don't understand. And the thing is, everything is possible. And that's a healthy perspective to have. But again, it comes back to, these admirals and these, again, I don't think it's the presidents per se, because Australia has the same issue. It's the internal bureaucracy, right? There's people that have been in the Australian government for 40 years. And how many prime ministers have they been through? It's just the next puppet that floats in and out every couple of years. Doesn't make any difference. You still do your job. You do whatever you need to do. And that's where it gets tied up, I think, in a lot of these countries, of evidence of all this stuff, right? But then the question is, if they know, why aren't they telling us, right? I mean, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there certainly seems to. I mean, if you listen to what his name is evading me for the moment, but that there seems to be this controlled dissemination of information going on since 2017. So, is that in part in an attempt to
building us towards something? You know what I mean?
To desensitize the populace of this topic, so that if there is a contact event or an actual disclosure event, that the world markets won't crash, and the the populations of the world won't turn into chaos and mayhem with all of the, So I don't know.
It does pose an interesting question. We went on a marathon session the other night with Anthony, and we started talking about, because for me and you, right, and the people that we talk to and the people that we follow and all these sorts of things, we're all birds of a feather. We're not necessarily religiously affiliated. We don't have any. Our belief system is completely open to the possibility of, I'd love to. We'll wrap it up soon, mate. But I'd love to hear your thoughts if you'd like Homo sapiens sapiens, whether or not we were genetically modified. But we'll come to that in a second. We're very open to it. We want it to happen. We want disclosure. But what we don't understand, and look, we sort of saw it the last few years, which percentage of the population is which, right? Who's going to walk lockstep, who's not, and who still follows blindly what the government says and who doesn't, right? But there's also religious context there. And the question I said to the boys the other night was like, because I sort of had a bit of a moment. I'm like, wow, what if we, let's say full disclosure happens, we're not alone in the universe, blah, blah, blah. Imagine a world where the Roman Catholic Church and Islam had no more power because their chosen God quite obviously didn't exist or doesn't exist, right? That would be total chaos, and it's easy for us to say, sitting here of a like mind, of a like research, and going, yeah, let's do it. There's still a vast percentage of the population that wouldn't take it very well, I think.
Yeah, we're just a very small microcosm of society. I mean, we're a very small community that, we're beyond the point of I want to believe. We're both of the frame. I want to know. We want to know what it is.
I've got no issues with that.
Yeah, so but unlike the vast majority of the general populace, who probably don't give two stuffs about this topic because they're worried about
distraction.
Yeah, exactly. They got the 9 to 5. They got to put food on the table for their kids, and that's granted. That's fair enough. So we are in a position in that if disclosure was made tomorrow, the proverbial UFOs landing on the White House lawn, a lot of us in this community would feel a sense of vindication and finalization that we now know, and now we can work to the next steps, which is to get us to a type 1 civilization, so that we can break away from being warring planet and
don't matter.
And tribalism and those sorts of things. And I've said this before. The one thing that really gets under my skin is if and this is kind of going back to what we talked about earlier about crash retrievals and so on. If the US government has operated successful crash retrieval programs for more than 75 years and has sacrificed the potential advancement of human civilization in favor of national security interests, and that really pisses me off, because surely there can be a balance between national security interests and the advancement of civilization. I mean, how much, if it comes out in the next, hopefully in our lifetime, that 0 point energy is a reality, and that
I think it absolutely is, by the way.
And I believe there's a lot of validity to it, but trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars have been wasted on on sending rockets to the skies, and Elon Musk crashing as many rockets as he has, and us being reliant on fossil fuels, and developing parts of the world still not being able to have fresh running water and these sorts of things. Shame on us as a human species for favoring
Yeah,
tribalism
the
and
mighty dollar. Yeah,
warmongering and the petrodollar and
collecting your gold.
national security interests in favor of advance. And that's my big fear, is that if we don't, as a species, if we cannot get past this warring mentality, this tribalism, that it's going to be really challenging for us to become a type 1 civilization.
Absolutely,
where we can harness the free energy and make this a sustainable planet that generations upon generations can thrive from.
Well, when you speak about free energy, I mean, again, my unlocking the code homework for you, mate, is go back and have a look at Otis Carr's episodes.
I'll do that. Yeah,
because
cool.
I think you find those very fascinating. However, that's one of the topics. It's so hard. There's so many rabbit holes, right? And one of the ones is this 0 point free energy stuff. There's so much technology that's been restricted, right? However, what I see now is there is a resurgence of people trying to understand Otis Carr's work and trying to make that anti-gravity machine work, because apparently he made it work, right? He did multiple test flights of a UAP in the 50s.
Right.
Both drones and at least one manned test flight.
I'll definitely look forward to giving that a listen. Yeah.
And he had, there's this weird codex. I'm not going to ruin it for you. But it's a bit of a strange ride. So, and I hold no responsibility for where in the rabbit hole you end up if you listen. Okay. But there's a resurgence of understanding of trying to grasp this magnetic dielectric fusion tech that it seems to be permeating the ether. Well, it's actually what this is, Grant. This technology is actually harnessing the ether. It's harnessing the space between spaces. It's utilizing that thing that joins everything else together. And yeah, I see a resurgence in that as well. And I wonder about that, right? Is there, and again, we start talking about esoteric, weird things with this conversation because we have to go there. It's like, is there downloads coming from the ether to those people who have the eyes to see and the ears to listen? I mean, like I said, I respect the work that you've done. I think it's amazing what you've done, and digging all this stuff up, and connecting with the community, and COVID was the catalyst. However, you've always had the calling, Grant.
It's always been there. Yeah. That was COVID was the facilitator that got it out. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And it's the same as the megalithic advanced civilization stuff for me. I was obsessed with aliens and pyramids when I was a boy. And it only till I got to the point where I wanted to start a passion project of my own that I've had a platform now to dig and release. And, we all have these callings, and I wonder whether that's not us doing our part for the whole,
Yep.
I think that's very important. What do you think about, I mean, obviously you talk about Homo sapiens sapien, Floresiensis. A lot of people are amazed to hear that I think there's been 24 hominids that have been discovered. A lot of those, the evidence is very thin, like a pinky bone and a bit of a jaw, and like a lot of it's very scratchy, right? So 2 questions. Have you heard about the Paracas skulls in South America?
I haven't, no.
Okay, that's another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
They're elongated skulls that haven't been bound.
Okay. Yep.
And they still see red hair. There's red. They're very odd. It's another one of those research rabbit holes that went down and I had to back out of a little bit because everything's so deep. But number 2, do you think, because one of the problems we have is the question, what makes me Triffin, you Grant, and what makes us conscious, and what gives us the ability, and how come we don't see that in any other observable hominid species on this planet? And it's a weird question. However, understanding now that we can genetically modify ourselves, that technology is fast approaching, or is already here, if you're to believe some of the stuff coming out of China and all those sorts of things. Do you think we are, because again, inside our bones is stardust, where it's not inside a monkey bone. Do you think that we were genetically modified? That's a big question, but what else explains it?
Yeah, it's interesting one. If you look at evolution and those that proponents of evolution, that I certainly think that there is a missing link somewhere in the chain of evolution, whether that is, I mean, you just look at the whole Bigfoot topic, and I mean, the work that Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum is doing on analyzing casts, foot casts, footprints, and he is 100% of the subscribes to the notion that there is an undiscovered or unknown bipedal hominid that is evading human detection, that is roaming all corners of the planet, and a lot of them in the north west of the United States, but there have been reportings going back
there's Yowie sightings
millennia. I mean, you look at the indigenous Australians, the Aboriginal people back to Dreamtime. You just look at, and then you look at the petroglyphs that are in cave paintings from sacred Aboriginal sites that have depictions of what we would in this day and age consider to be a classic alien grey. So there are things that have been observed in our distant past that still continue to this day and age. Why we are so fortunate as Homo sapiens sapien to be in a position where we could not only survive but thrive in our environment and create things for the betterment and the enjoyment of. And it kind of goes to what Joe Rogan was saying. He was saying when he was interviewing, I think it was Ryan Graves, that the fact that we can just create and invent stuff. We're always seeking for something better or the next best thing. And the fact that we don't merely survive, but we thrive in our environment, and we want to continue making it bigger and better and look for the next best thing. That is something that's not shared by any other living beings that I'm aware of on this planet. And so, how did we get to this position that we're in today, where that's our motivation? We're driven by.
But it's also the ability to talk, the ability to communicate and comprehend and create,
and consciousness, and the ability.
Because we still don't know why we're conscious, right? This is of all the amazing things that we do know. What makes me Triffin, you Grant, we actually don't know. We don't know, right?
Yep.
And we're two completely different beings, different thought processes. What is that? How come if we plug a multimeter into ourselves, we get a 0.3 of an amp back charge? Something is powering us. Something is making us who we are.
So to your original question, was there some form of genetic manipulation along our path? Possibly. I certainly would not be one to say, nah, that's ridiculous. That's just bullshit talk. I've always positioned myself as someone that is an ordinary dude that believes in extraordinary things, but has a healthy degree of skepticism, but also an open mind. Yeah. So you have to approach things with a healthy degree of skepticism, but also be open to the fact that there are so many things that we just don't know about that could change our reality or understanding of things the very next day. So is it possible that there was some level of assistance or manipulation to our DNA at some point in our history? Yeah, possibly. Maybe. And, there have been folks that have hinted at that on a number of occasions. Like you have, think of it what you will, but Luis Elizondo was on, with Kurt Jaimungal on Theories of Everything some months back, and was talking about, well, when you think of archaeology, you think of relics, but what about looking at what is in our DNA? You have
DNA is now known to be an excellent storage device.
Absolutely, yeah.
Data can be stored on DNA.
That's right. So what is it about our DNA and the human genome that is still there to discover. I mean, the human genomic sequence was, I think, identified a decade or two ago, but there are still many, many things that we don't fully understand about, genetics, DNA. We're learning things every time. So
And one of the
has there?
interesting, yeah, one of the interesting thing about the ancient stuff as well, mate, is that they knew about the genetic sequence, that double helix, right? The
Yeah.
snake around the pole. There's the two snakes around the pole. That is represented again and again and again and again and again in ancient cultures, in ancient times. And a lot of the indigenous stories, like the true indigenous story, like the true indigenous story of Australia, is the Palladian story. You know, the seven sisters of the Pallades, you know, traveled to the earth, were being traced by the three brothers of Orion across the stars, and they came here and they couldn't quite adapt. So they adapted the hominids that were here to be a better human. There's the Sumerian texts. You know, there's all sorts of, I mean, we've only translated not even a percentage of those tablets. However, one of the ones we did, it says that they knew the cataclysm was coming was so bad that they fled the planet, right? And that's
Interesting.
12,000, 13,000 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, so, and then, yeah, it's interesting. I've got an open mind, and there's some interesting work done by Bruce Fenton. There's some interesting indigenous culture stories that echo around the globe that sort of say that we did, and we were modified potentially, and I'm open to it. I'm just as open to that as the stoned ape theory from Terence McKenna, where we ate psychedelic mushrooms and you know that we activated our brain and sent us forth.
It's,
you know what I mean?
You got to leave it all on the table until it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that's the best approach to. Again, it comes back to the trust but verify, but still keep an open mind in how you approach. A whole myriad of topics, because there's so much stuff that we don't know and don't understand, and it's important for us to continue to ask questions and be the Avi Loebs of the world, and wanting to embark on scientific scrutiny and analysis of things that we don't understand.
Absolutely, mate. Well, look, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Because I know it's getting late down under. Oh, down. It is getting late down under, but it's getting late down where you are, mate. And we are fathers and full-time workers. Is there any other?
I guess that for me, we live in incredibly exciting times. Like coming back to the UAP
times, mate. I would say prophetic times.
The UFO topic. I mean, look what we've experienced just in the last 5 years. Like in May of this year, we had our first, public congressional hearing on UFO, the first in my lifetime, and that was incredibly exciting. Even as underwhelming as it was,
like 3 pages came out of it, or whatever it was. But
and having, the Wilson Davis documents were entered into the congressional record in the US. It was still it's still an incredibly exciting time to be alive, because there are things going on at the moment that our parents would not have dreamed of if they had an interest in this topic. And I think that there is just so much more to look forward to, certainly as we enter into the year ahead in 2023 with, the whistleblower protections and the anti-reprisal legislation, hopefully that's going to get signed into law. You've got NASA has just embarked on a 9-month study of UAP. You've got the Galileo project, hoping to produce its first report next year. You've got we're expecting a report to come from the US at the end of this month on an update on its
second one.
its investigation of this topic. So what are you excited for in the next 12 months on this topic? What do you think lies ahead in the next year?
Geez, it's hard at the moment to predict what's going to happen. Like we could wake up tomorrow and the whole world would be different. However,
well, I mean, with so many
I would love to see anti-gravitic technology, because through my research, and we don't have time to go into it now, however, through Otis T. Carr's work, he was a protege of Tesla, I think we understand a version of this 0-point energy and free energy technology, harnessing the magnetic
energy and stuff of the earth. And I think we've known about it for a long time. And I think we're going to be highly disappointed at how long we've known about it because of the quest for fossil fuel and the mighty dollar, and the just feeding the gold coffers of the global cabal. However, I sincerely hope that we can move forward as far as from an energy point of view and from a technology point of view. And will that happen? I don't know, but I'm very curious. I'm very, because I don't trust any government. I have issues with what they release.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's independent researchers like yourself and the fine gentlemen and ladies that you mentioned tonight throughout the show. It's researchers like that. I'll watch those guys. What do they say? You know what I mean? What's their interpretation? But we have to move, like you said, man. The end of the day, we've got to realize love is the answer. We've got to realize that sex, color, creed, religion, all that stuff makes no difference. And if we're ever going to move forward and be part of the galactic civilization that I think exists, maybe look, the only thing we didn't talk about is the moon and the solar system, but maybe we leave that for another day.
That'd be part two.
Part two, yeah. We've got to realize that in order to move forward. And I think we've always got to remember that, we've got high definition screens in front of us. We just waxed lyrical and we didn't really in depth anything. We just brushed on a heap of topics that deserve much more attention. That is a single pixel in the screen that we're looking into, right? That is the amount of knowledge that we have, right? Whereas all the pixels in the screen are the amount of knowledge that is actually out there, and as long as we continue to understand that. However, I'm looking forward. I want to see what Core Bell releases, right? Because I think what's going to happen is that the government stuff is going to move forward, and that will give him the green light to release more stuff that he has. There's also some of this 0-point energy and this dielectric magnetic gravitic technology. I think there's a few people waiting for green lights, and they will release some of that. And I'm very fascinated to see what that brings. And then what it tells us about our past, right? How many of these craft were found at ancient sites? Because, I could spend hours talking to you about that sort of stuff, where, depictions of UFOs and stories of beings from the sky and all that stuff is littered throughout ancient history.
Well, I think you raise a good point. Again, love him or hate him, but I think Dr. Stephen Greer's next project will be an interesting one when he's crowdfunding his next film documentary. I think he's titled it The Lost Century. So he will actually cover a lot of these technologies that have been mastered. Anti-gravity, if that was mastered in the 50s, why has that technology been
suppressed?
Suppressed.
Well, I think you talk about hydrogen technologies. There was a guy, I can never remember his name when I talk about it. Basically, and again, the story goes, it's something like how many patents for all the best technology in the world, how much of it was channeled or was come through to people on psychedelics it's a ridiculous percentage. But yeah, this guy channeled a free energy device that he basically, I think he was, I don't know whether he was an Aussie. I can't remember the details, but anyway, it basically was two poles in the earth and then using magnets and stuff to create enough energy to power his house, right? And this was in the 60s and 70s. And as usual, I think he crashed into a tree, mate. It was the only tree within a 5-kilometer radius. You know what I mean? Those guys accidentally shoot themselves in the head twice with that stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I want to see that, because that could tip everything on its head, right? My greatest concern as a father and as a citizen of the world is that they're pushing us towards another big war, right? Because that's the next, the triads, sickness, economic, and war, and we've had maybe before we start throwing nuclear bombs at each other, right? We can reveal some of this stuff so we can stop and prop and go, hey, maybe this isn't worth it. and hopefully, for our children's sake, mate, that is the case.
I agree. I agree. We certainly live in, scary times. Our parents, lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, which for their generation was a scariest time to be alive. And I think we live in a comparable time now with a crazy man with his hand on the button over in Russia. So,
And then shaky granddad's hand at the other end, which I wouldn't trust him to put the number in. You know what I mean?
no, you can't. No matter who you elect into office, you can't win with who has the who makes the decisions. But
again, okay, so the release of this technology, the release of the understanding of UAPs, UFOs, and the ongoing ripple effect would render the power that these people have useless. And I think that's probably the key as to why it's being drip fed to a degree. They want to take their riches before they get,
Yeah, I think there's some credence to that for sure. Yeah, and maintaining this global spectrum dominance, this competitive advantage above and beyond our peers, our adversaries, and that again, it comes back to that whole tribalism issue, because we're such a warfaring planet, that unfortunately is going to drive a lot of the. I mean, I've said time and time again, the secrecy that's long plagued this topic has unfortunately bred distrust, suspicion, which has long bred distrust. So the longer that secrecy exists behind the walls of government, and it's there are only a small number that have a need to know that actually know, then secrecy will unfortunately continue to persist, and there'll always be distrust in government for as long as there's secrecy. So,
here's hoping, mate. And let's those listeners, even the international listeners around the globe, give me the links for that the petition or whatever it is to write into
absolutely.
the senators. And tell the people where your YouTube video is. Oh, and by the way, Tombstone is the best movie, man. Like, I think that
I'm a big Wide Up fan.
Yeah. Look, Big Trouble in Little China. Like, when we were younger, for sure. When we were younger, for sure. However, Tombstone is he's in the top 5 of my favorite movies, and that's because of
Kurt and Val Kilmer certainly did Wide Open, Doc Holliday justice with that film. One of my favorites. So, but I mean, I'm again, being an obsessed Kurt fan. I love anything that he does. So,
I like the fact that he's come back and done the Christmas Chronicles. My kids have really enjoyed those.
And my little one, who's now almost 3, she's getting into it. So I'm pleased I'm able to enjoy some of his fun stuff with my little one. Yeah.
So where can people find you, mate? What's the name of your YouTube channel?
Feel free to engage me on Twitter. My handle is just my full name, at Grant Lavac, GrantLavac. You can find me on YouTube. Just search for Grant Lavac. You'll find me there as well. My channel is called. Actually, they're now changing handles with YouTube. So if you continue just to type in Grant Lavac, you'll find me. But the channel that I run is called the Unexplained Rundown, where I cover primarily my journey on the UAP topic and engaging my elected representatives on UAP in an Australian context. But I do cover other topics as well, some fun stuff like Kurt Russell and the Phoenix Lights, his encounter on the 13th of March 1997.
Very cool.
And I've got a couple other interviews lined up in the months ahead that are UAP related, but slightly offshoots of the topic.
Well, I look forward to it, mate. And look, any updates that come along or anything else like that. Look, this is our first conversation, mate. However, I don't think it'll be our last one. And thank you very much for joining me tonight. And
been a pleasure.
I tell you what I really appreciated is that when I was watching that Kurt video, and I'm not going to spoil it for everyone because it's well worth a watch. Very well done. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
is that you're totally right, mate. Us content creators out here, I don't get paid for this. This is a passion and an obsession, and yeah, I really appreciated that little ditty at the start where you said, you know, kudos to my fellow creators. And because, yeah, it's hard to explain to people, you know, like I said, you know, there's 15, 20 folders that I can see just glancing up at the second screen there that are to do with research rabbit holes that I do for a show that I've been doing for a long time. However, you know, so it's cool. And I appreciate your efforts. And I just
you're very welcome. Well, it's so true, because you know the amount of time and energy and effort that you invest into not just what the public see, which is, you know, you on screen or listening to a podcast, but it's the hours upon hours upon hours that go into the research, the production behind the scene, promoting it, make sure that, you know, people like the content and they share it. So I have a ton of respect for folks like yourself and Anthony and really anyone that, you know, has you know, that consistent persistence to doing what they do and putting out great content on a topic that they're so passionate about. So, you know, it's credit to their love for the topic.
Well, I just wanted to return serve, mate. Thank you. I appreciate your work as well.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Good on you, everyone. Thanks very much. All the links will be in the show notes, and we'll get some other stuff that we can put up on the page and stuff like that. Thanks, mate. Until next time.
Mate, been great chatting with you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Griffin.
No worries.
All the best.
Just want to go again?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Go again.
All right. I know you been here before. No surprises settle the score. I know the darkness deep inside. Reckless rage, poison pride. I know the anger, I know the pain, and I know the fear we do not name. And the one who comes to find me when my time is through, I know you, I know you. Wow. I know you. Better.